Let's begin with the ceasefire. What does this moment signify for the people of Gaza?
The moment of a ceasefire is a signal of ending the massacres that started in the 7th of October 2023 that led the 10,000 of martyrs and more than 100,000 wounded and more than 20,000 between arrested or missing and under the robbers. It is a very historical moment following the success of a blockade between Egypt, Qatar, and USA. The start in the 1315 upon the cessation of the fighting and the massacres against the Palestinian people in Gaza Strip. This is a historical moment, whereas the population of Gaza Strip were suffering firstly of the continued and sustainable bombardment, along with the famine, because of the prevention of the delivering aid in the Gaza Strip. And today we've seen something different upon the announcement of the ceasefire and the truce entering into force. So the strip was relieved a little, and rest assured that the drone and the bombardment and the chilling will be stopped for about 42 days, which is the first phase that witnessed the release of 3 female prisoners by the Palestinian resistance and delivered and handed over to the Red Cross and then to Israel. And now Israel is working on to release the prisoners as announced through the upcoming minutes. Maybe they will be released on very vehicles that belong to the Israeli armies in order to prevent the joy. So it is a historical moment when the Palestinian people has been moved from the sound of aircraft and bombardment that they never left the Gaza Strip since the first day of the aggression.
Well, let's come to the prisoner exchange, which is a profoundly emotional aspect of this deal. What does it mean for both sides?
Both sides prolonged this very critical moment upon or through which seeing their beloved ones to come out imprisoned, the freedom that was prevented by the Israel at the beginning of the war, when they agreed to release tens of the Israeli captives and hundreds of the Palestinian prisoners. A very significant moment, whether the Palestinians or the Israelis are living. Palestinians are staying in prison for life's imprisonment, stayed in the prison for more than 23 years. In the upcoming days will plead the freedom, as well as the Israeli captives who are released today. Since the start of the war, Israel rejected several attempts of the negotiation. Lately, the last one that was proposed in May rejected the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, as he wanted to make a very prolonged war for his own reasons. never wished to end the aggression and the war as they wanted to achieve the announced objectives, including the elimination of Hamas and as well along with political reason. But to sit with Hamas movement on the negotiation table is a great victory for the Palestinians and the resistance who suffered from the first day of the war the operations of killing and destruction. This day was a day of a celebration for the families of the prisoners, a day to gather with their families and beloved. That reminded us of several deals that such as the Shalit deal. So negotiation to free the captives is something normal that should be taken, but is to say release the prisoners by force. This is something that the Israeli army, along with Netanyahu, have failed to do.
Now, there are reports of restrictions on celebrations for captives. This has happened in previous prisoner exchange deals. It was ignored last time. Do you think this restriction on celebrations will be adhered to? Seems unfair.
Of course, it is not unfair to deal with treating the Palestinian resistance and delivering the Israeli captives as happened today and before in the first agreement. There were 3 of Palestinians were released. In the contrary, when occupying forces rejected and sent their instruction to the families of not to make any types of joy or celebration, not to even go out in the streets of either in Jerusalem or in the Gaza Strip to celebrate the release of the captives. Even today, Israel said that it will release the prisoners in vehicles of the Israeli army. This streams give us the impression that Israel, by releasing the captives, are defeated. They never wished to release them, and they never wished for their family to celebrate meeting their prisoners who spent in the prison for years. Therefore, it is the right of the Palestinian people to celebrate the release of their prisoners and for Israel to provide freedom for the prisoners to celebrate with their families. Such strains have no grounds. In return, that treatment was good by the resistance for the Israeli for the Israeli prisoners, and we've seen the reactions between the Israeli captives and those who were kidnapped them. That proves, despite they were under the force of the armed fighters, the resistance gave lessons to the Israeli occupiers in dealing with the prisoner. That's what they should be doing. But issue an instruction not to accompany any tools for celebration or not to transport the prisoners in a very in special cars for celebration, and in that way these restraints have no human ground. Palestinian resistance give lessons on how to deliver or to hand over the prisoners and how to deal with them, the Israeli prisoners, I mean. In return, Israel used to abuse the captives in tossing the gas bombs before them or against them. So This type of strains should have no ground and shouldn't be there, should be replaced by the facilitation of releasing the captives and the prisoners. People spend a great times in the prisons. Several features often appears in dealing with the Palestinian prisoners by the Israeli forces.
And I just want to tell our viewers what we're looking at now. We're looking at live pictures of a prison where many of those prisoners who have been captive, as Dr. Meher was saying, for many years, often many decades, and that's the prison where they will be released from. And it seems there's a military helicopter transport which has arrived at the prison. I want to ask you, Dr. Meher, how do the detention conditions for Palestinian captives reflect the larger dynamics of this conflict?
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, along with the detention process meant by the Israeli when they do detentions for the Palestinian, is a type of punishment that the Palestinian use to abuse them physically and psychologically, and to have them subjected to an unprofound investigation process and to keep them imprisoned without any trials, administratively or legally, and not to. It is a policy of the Israeli policy of preventing the centers of human rights to explore what the Palestinian prisoners are suffering within the Israeli prisons, often physical abusement, as we've seen the torture processes made by the Israeli army detaining the Palestinian detainees and get them out of their detention center naked in a very cold weather, even inappropriate means of delivering their food for them as they are some sort of animals. So they were treated very harsh by Israel for the Palestinian prisoners. Even there were a great testimony is reported that prisoners were felt dead due to their chronic diseases that present and emerged while they were in prison, and even for the injured, they were injured by fighting. So Israel is through their treatment of the Palestinians, has given a message for them that they have no prisoners and they will be detained and then they will be killed. That it is an immoral policy by the Israeli against the Palestinian prisoners. And in return, the Israeli captives and within or detained by the resistance forces were treated nicely, and that was articulated by the first batch of detainees when they were released in the first process of exchange. This sort of, and those were detained by the Palestinian resistance were killed due to the Israeli bombardment in Gaza. and the treatment made by the Israeli army. Even Ben Gvir was proud of abusing the Palestinian prisoners within prison. It is a message for the whole world that Israel is the one to violate the human rights and detain the civilians under the pretext as they are resistant. Is it logical for 20,000 resistant to be detained in several different times? This is only to justify the means and by storming the Palestinian houses and pushing them into prison. And do the operation for them and keep them in the prison without any trials and their families do not know anything about several and many of the Palestinian prisoners inside the Israeli prisoners. A committee should be formed to explore this matter and investigate. Several of the Palestinians do not know their fate yet. Dr. Hassam Abu Sufia was one of the last one being detained and only recently exposed where he was. Israel is dependent this sort of policy against the Palestinian prisoner.
And of course, we're expecting to see 90 Palestinian prisoners released shortly, 2,000 overall over the next 6 weeks. What does this prisoner exchange reveal about the priorities of each side in this conflict?
When the cooperation is present between the parties, committees, negotiators for releasing the detainees or captives, whether they are the Israeli inside Gaza or from the the Palestinian prisoners who are going to spend their life, the rest of their lives in the prison, is just to mitigate the tension of the conflict between the Israeli and the Palestinian. Nothing should be based on violence, but only negotiation that would lead to a peaceful solution. Many of the countries were suffering this before, but only through negotiation and through this time they understand there was some sort of a compromise between the two countries to mitigate this process of the conflict between other countries. So the process of releasing, whether they are inside Israeli prisons or the captives with Hamas, that would indicate that there is some sort of peaceful negotiation on the ground of the limits between the two parties, either the Israeli or the Palestinian, and therefore why shouldn't we have an exchange of prisoners and detainees as long as there are an agreement to be made and all countries even do this, such as Ukraine and Russia, and should be a role model to have some sort of coexistence between Israelis and the Palestinians, and to put an end of the era of the existence of conflict that Israel is considering it is as a matter of existence. So the understanding should be based standards and criteria sponsored by Egypt or Qatar or the United States or the regional countries that they never wish to keep the war in the region, whether in Palestine or in the Middle East in general.
And finally, and if you could be brief, because we're almost out of time, what lessons do you think we can draw from previous failed ceasefires and exchanges to help ensure that this one actually lasts?
The process of exchange of detainees should be based on the ground of based on the human rights law, and upon the exchange that took place today, based on the first phase that led to a temporary ceasefire, and therefore would be moving to the following phases, the second and the third. I think that there is determination from either or to put an end of the occupation in general.
Well, thank you very much for being here with us on Q News on this historic day, Dr. Meher Safi. Thank you very much for being with us.